Dr. Sarah Mitchell's hands trembled slightly as she held the sepia-toned photograph under the museum's bright examination light. The October rain drummed against the windows of the Peabody Essex Museum's conservation lab, creating an atmosphere of quiet contemplation that perfectly matched her methodical work. The image had arrived that morning in a dusty shoebox from the estate of Eleanor Whitman, a recently deceased collector from Salem, Massachusetts, whose obsession with 19th-century photography had filled her Victorian mansion with thousands of historical images. What should have been routine archival work, cataloging, dating, and filing another batch of period photographs, had become something entirely different the moment Sarah noticed what others had missed for over a century. Her 15 years as a museum curator specializing in American social history had trained her to spot anomalies, but this discovery made her question everything she thought she knew about photographic documentation. The photograph showed the Hartwell family standing proudly in front of their modest two-story home in Millbrook, Connecticut, captured on what appeared to be a pleasant summer day in 1899. 5 figures posed with the rigid formality typical of the era. Patriarch Thomas Hartwell, a distinguished man in his 40s wearing a dark suit and watch chain, his wife Margaret, elegant in her best dress with intricate lace collar, and their 3 children ranging from 8 to 16 years old, each dressed in their Sunday finest. The house behind them exemplified late 19th century New England domestic architecture, white clapboard siding weathered to a soft gray, black shutters flanking each window, and a wraparound porch adorned with elaborate gingerbread trim that spoke to the family's middle-class prosperity. A white picket fence enclosed a well-maintained garden where roses climbed wooden trellises, completing the picture of American domestic tranquility during the height of the Gilded Age. Sarah adjusted her high-powered magnifying glass and leaned closer to the photograph, her breath fogging the glass surface as she studied every millimeter of the mysterious shadow. The conservation lab fell silent except for the steady tick of the antique clock on her desk and the distant hum of climate control systems maintaining perfect temperature and humidity for the precious artifacts in her care. The shadow was more complex than she had initially realized. Using her jeweler's loupe, she could make out subtle variations in density that suggested the person casting it wore period-appropriate clothing, a long coat or duster, and what appeared to be a bowler hat, both typical of a late 19th century gentleman. More intriguingly, there seemed to be an object in the shadow caster's right hand, something elongated that could have been a walking stick, umbrella, or perhaps another camera. Sarah pulled out her laptop and began cross-referencing the image with her extensive database of 19th century photography techniques and equipment. Glass plate cameras of that era were massive, unwieldy instruments that required photographers to work under dark cloths while focusing and composing their shots. The exposure process was a delicate dance of timing and chemistry, with subjects having to remain absolutely motionless to avoid ghosting or blur. She compared the Hartwell photograph with other family portraits from the same period, studying shadow patterns and lighting angles. In every other case, the shadows belonged to visible subjects or predictable objects like chairs, garden furniture, or architectural features. Never had she encountered a human shadow cast by someone deliberately positioned outside the frame. Sarah began researching the Hartwell family through genealogical databases and historical records. According to the 1900 U.S. Census, Thomas Hartwell had been a successful grain merchant who moved his family to Millbrook in 1895 from Hartford, Connecticut. The family appeared to have lived quietly and respectably in the small community until tragedy struck in late November 1899. Sarah decided she needed to visit Millbrook, Connecticut, hoping to find additional records or perhaps longtime residents who might provide insights into the mysterious shadow and the Hartwell family's abrupt departure. The 2-hour drive from Boston took her through some of New England's most picturesque countryside, rolling hills dotted with stone walls built by colonial farmers, maple trees displaying their autumn glory in brilliant reds and golds, and small villages where white church steeples pierced azure skies. Millbrook hadn't changed dramatically since the Hartwell's era. Main Street still featured several buildings from the Victorian period, their decorative trim and bay windows testament to the prosperity of the late 1800s. The town hall, constructed of red brick with limestone accents, housed municipal offices where Sarah hoped to find property records, fire department reports, and perhaps more detailed accounts of the November 1899 tragedy. The elderly town clerk, Mrs. Dorothy Chen, greeted Sarah with the enthusiasm of someone who rarely encountered researchers interested in local history. Her office was a testament to generations of careful record-keeping. Tall oak filing cabinets lined the walls, their drawers labeled with dates spanning back to the town's incorporation in 1847. The air smelled of aged paper and leather bindings, reminiscent of old libraries and archives. The Hartwell place? Mrs. Chen's expression shifted from welcoming to troubled when Sarah explained her research. Oh my, that's been a source of local legend for over a century. The house was rebuilt after the fire by the Hartford investment company that bought the property, but it's changed hands more times than any other residence in town. Local folks have always whispered that it's cursed, though I don't put much stock in such superstitions. Mrs. Chen led Sarah down creaking wooden stairs to the basement archives, where row upon row of file cabinets held the town's documentary history, birth certificates, death records, property deeds, tax assessments, and municipal meeting minutes dating back to Millbrook's founding. Mrs. Chen's great-aunt, 95-year-old Violet Morrison, resided at the Millbrook Senior Care Center, a converted Victorian mansion whose wraparound porch and gabled roof spoke to the town's prosperous past. Despite her advanced age, Violet's pale blue eyes remained remarkably clear and alert, and her mind retained the sharp clarity of someone who had witnessed nearly a century of local history. Sarah found her in the facility's sunroom, where tall windows overlooked gardens that were settling into autumn dormancy. Violet's gnarled hands, marked with age spots and prominent veins, gestured animatedly as she spoke, and her voice carried the distinctive accent of old New England families whose roots stretched back to colonial times. I was just 12 years old when it happened, Violet began, her voice carrying the weight of decades of carefully guarded secrets. My mother strictly forbade me from discussing it, said it would bring shame and danger to our family. But I remember that terrible night in November with perfect clarity. The acrid smell of smoke carried on the wind, the orange glow against the low clouds, and most haunting of all, the screaming that came from the direction of the Hartwell house. It wasn't just the sound of people fleeing from fire, mind you. Those were screams of terror, of people facing something far worse than flames. Violet paused, studying Sarah's face with the calculating gaze of someone deciding how much truth to reveal. Thomas Hartwell wasn't the upstanding citizen people made him out to be after the tragedy. There had been persistent rumors about his business dealings for months before the fire, whispers about significant debts to dangerous men from Hartford who didn't accept failure or delays in payment. My father worked at Henshaw's grain mill and said Thomas had been acting increasingly paranoid for weeks, constantly checking over his shoulder, jumping at unexpected sounds, behaving like a man who knew trouble was coming for him and his family. Armed with Violet's revelations about Thomas Hartwell's financial troubles and the suspicious circumstances surrounding the fire, Sarah made the drive to Hartford to investigate his business connections more thoroughly. The Connecticut Historical Society occupied an impressive brick building in the heart of the city's cultural district, its archives containing extensive records of the state's commercial and industrial development during the late 19th century. The research librarian, Dr. James Whitmore, was a thin, scholarly man in his 60s whose encyclopedic knowledge of Hartford's business history proved invaluable. He led Sarah to a climate-controlled vault where leather-bound ledgers and wooden filing cabinets contained the financial records of dozens of grain merchants, mill operators, and commodity traders who had operated during the 1890s. After hours of searching through dusty ledgers filled with meticulous handwriting, Sarah discovered what she was looking for in the records of the Hartford Mercantile Exchange. Thomas Hartwell's name appeared repeatedly in debt collection notices and legal proceedings filed by Marconi Brothers Enterprises, a firm that specialized in high-interest loans to struggling merchants and farmers throughout New England. The debt had grown from a modest $500 loan in early 1899 to an astronomical $3,200 by October, a fortune equivalent to several years' wages for most working families. The correspondence between Hartwell and the Marconi brothers revealed an increasingly desperate situation. Hartwell's letters pleaded for extended payment terms, while the brothers' responses grew progressively more threatening and demanding immediate settlement. Sarah's most significant breakthrough came when she discovered a leather portfolio containing private investigator reports commissioned by the Marconi brothers' attorney. The documents, filed with the Hartford County Clerk's office as evidence in a civil suit, revealed that the brothers suspected Hartwell of planning to fake his own death and disappear to avoid paying his substantial debts. Sarah's investigation led her to the Denver Public Library's Western History collection, a renowned repository of documents chronicling the great westward migration of the late 19th century. The imposing stone building housed millions of records documenting the lives of families who had sought new beginnings in the American frontier, fleeing everything from economic hardship to legal troubles in the established eastern states. The research process required tremendous patience and systematic methodology. Sarah spent 3 intensive days examining immigration records, school enrollment documents, property purchases, newspaper society pages, and even church membership rolls from Colorado mining towns and farming communities where desperate families might seek anonymity and fresh starts. Her breakthrough came while examining enrollment records from Colorado Springs schools. A woman identifying herself as Martha Hartley, a name tantalizingly close to Margaret Hartwell, had registered 2 children at Pine Street Elementary School in January 1900. The enrollment documents listed the children as Edward Hartley, age 16, and Emily Hartley, age 8, ages that corresponded exactly to the surviving Hartwell children at the time of their supposed deaths in the Connecticut house fire. The school records indicated that Martha claimed to be a recent widow whose husband had perished in an industrial accident back east. She had no local references or employment history, yet somehow possessed sufficient funds to rent a comfortable house in a respectable neighborhood and provide her children with proper clothing and school supplies. Sarah immediately drove to Colorado Springs, hoping to find traces of the family's life in hiding. The city had grown dramatically since 1900, but several neighborhoods still contained original Victorian houses where the Hartleys might have lived. Her first stop was the Colorado Springs Historical Society, where local genealogist Mrs. Agnes Patterson had spent decades documenting the area's pioneer families and their stories. Back in Boston, Sarah contacted Detective Ray Kowalski, a recently retired Hartford police officer whose 30-year career had included extensive investigation of organized crime activities from the early 1900s. His reputation as an expert on historical cold cases and his particular knowledge of the Marconi brothers' operations made him an invaluable resource for understanding the true scope and sinister nature of the Hartwell mystery. Detective Kowalski agreed to meet Sarah at a quiet cafe in downtown Boston, arriving with a worn leather briefcase containing decades of accumulated research materials. His weathered face and sharp gray eyes spoke to years of investigating dangerous criminals and uncovering carefully buried secrets. As he spread newspaper clippings, police reports, and photographic evidence across their corner table, the full scope of the Marconi brothers' criminal enterprise began to emerge. People today don't understand how these loan sharks operated in the 1890s, Detective Kowalski explained, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent his career studying criminal behavior. The Marconi brothers weren't simply businessmen who lent money at high interest rates. They owned people completely once that first payment was missed. When Thomas Hartwell borrowed from them, he essentially signed his family's death warrant if he couldn't satisfy his obligations. Kowalski pulled out a manila folder containing yellowed newspaper clippings and official police reports spanning the 1890s and early 1900s. Examine this pattern of accidents, fires, and disappearances involving their debtors throughout New England. The incidents were always conveniently timed and precisely destructive enough to send clear messages to other borrowers, while eliminating the immediate problem of unpaid debts. He pointed to specific cases: a grain merchant in New Haven whose mill burned under suspicious circumstances, a furniture maker in Springfield whose entire family vanished after missing loan payments, a tobacco farmer in the Connecticut River Valley whose barn fire killed both him and his eldest son. Sarah's investigation took a dark and dramatic turn when Detective Kowalski's contacts in the Colorado Springs Police Department uncovered archived records from 1903 that had been misfiled for over a century. The documents revealed that the Hartley family, Thomas, Margaret, and their children living under their assumed identities, had been discovered and brutally murdered in their Colorado home, victims of what authorities had officially classified as a robbery gone wrong. The police report made for chilling reading. 3 unidentified male suspects broke into the Hartley residence during the early morning hours of February 14, 1903. Family members were bound with rope and systematically interrogated before being shot execution style. Despite the violent nature of the crime, money and valuable items were left untouched throughout the house, suggesting the perpetrators were searching for something specific rather than conducting a typical robbery. The timing of the murders coincided perfectly with the private investigator's final report that Sarah had discovered in the Hartford archives. The Marconi brothers had finally succeeded in tracking down their escaped debtors and had exacted their calculated revenge, nearly 4 years after the stage fire that was supposed to have secured the family's permanent freedom. Sarah contacted the Colorado Springs Police Department's cold case unit and spoke extensively with Detective Maria Gonzalez, who had recently reviewed the Hartley murders as part of a larger investigation into organized crime connections between eastern and western cities during the early 1900s. What makes this case particularly disturbing, Detective Gonzalez explained during their lengthy phone conversation, is that we found clear evidence the family knew they were being watched and had been living in constant fear for months before their deaths. Margaret Hartley had written several desperate letters to distant relatives back east, specifically warning them to stay away from Colorado and mentioning dangerous men from Hartford who had been making inquiries around town about the family's background and daily routines. With the help of cutting-edge forensic enhancement technology available to modern investigators, Sarah was finally able to identify the person who had cast the mysterious shadow that had haunted historians for over a century. Working closely with Dr. Rebecca Chen, a digital imaging specialist at Boston University's Forensic Science Laboratory, Sarah had the original 1899 photograph scanned at ultra-high resolution, using equipment typically reserved for criminal investigations and art authentication. The process took several hours and involved multiple scanning techniques, including infrared and ultraviolet photography that could reveal details invisible to the naked eye. Dr. Chen then subjected the enhanced images to sophisticated shadow analysis algorithms originally developed for NASA satellite imagery, which could determine the height, posture, and even clothing details of subjects based on their shadows alone. The results were stunning and disturbing in equal measure. The shadow belonged to a man approximately 5 feet 8 inches tall, wearing the distinctive bowler hat and long overcoat typical of professional men during the 1890s. More significantly, the enhancement technology revealed that he was holding something substantial in his right hand, an object with the distinctive rectangular shape and proportions of a large format camera, the type used by professional photographers and private investigators of the period. Sarah's next breakthrough came when she cross-referenced this physical description with employment records from the Pinkerton Detective Agency's Hartford office, which had maintained detailed personnel files on all their operatives. After hours of searching through archived documents, she found a perfect match. Detective William Bill Crane, a specialist in covert surveillance and photographic documentation, who had worked numerous high-profile cases for wealthy clients throughout New England. Crane's personnel file painted a picture of a methodical, ruthless investigator who took tremendous professional pride in his ability to remain undetected while gathering comprehensive evidence on his subjects. His preferred technique involved photographing targets from concealed positions, creating detailed visual documentation of their daily activities, social contacts, and potential escape routes. The final pieces of the puzzle came together when Sarah discovered Bill Crane's own photographic collection, donated to the Connecticut State Library after his death in 1924. Among hundreds of surveillance photographs documenting various cases was a complete series of images showing the Hartwell family's activities throughout the summer of 1899. The photographs told the story of a family living in fear, constantly looking over their shoulders, making desperate preparations for an elaborate escape that they knew was already compromised. In image after image, Thomas Hartwell could be seen checking the street before leaving his house, Margaret pulling curtains closed during daylight hours, the children playing in their backyard with nervous glances toward the surrounding trees. But the most revealing photograph was the last one in the series, taken on the morning of November 15, 1899, the day of the fire. It showed Thomas Hartwell loading a wagon behind his house while Margaret and the 2 younger children waited in the shadows. The image was time-stamped 4:30 a.m., hours before the fire was reported. Sarah's investigation had uncovered a tragedy that spanned the entire American continent and lasted 4 years. The Hartwell family had indeed staged their own deaths to escape crushing debt and certain violence, successfully fooling their community and even fooling historians for over a century. But they had never escaped the watchful eye of Bill Crane, whose shadow in that innocent family portrait had documented their doom from the very beginning. In the end, the mysterious shadow that had haunted historians wasn't supernatural or inexplicable. It was evidence of a predator patiently stalking its prey. The Hartwell's story became a testament to both human ingenuity and the relentless pursuit of those who refused to let anyone escape their grasp. Today, that 1899 photograph hangs in Sarah's office, a reminder that every image holds secrets, and sometimes those secrets are darker than we ever imagine. The shadow on the porch still falls across the wooden floorboards, frozen in time, eternal proof that someone is always watching, always waiting, always documenting the moments before everything changes forever.